5. And in today's podcast, I'm here again with my good friend Kyle from the Army. Say hello, Kyle.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
All right. So let's get started, shall we? Chapter 5. When I came home to West Egg that night, I was afraid for a moment that my house was on fire. 2 o'clock, and the whole corner of the peninsula was blazing with light which fell unreal on the shrubbery and made thin, elegant glints upon the roadside wires. Turning a corner, I saw that it was Gatsby's house, lit from tower to cellar. Again, he's like the light attracting the moths, right? Mm-hmm. At first, I thought it was another party, a wild rout that had resolved itself into hide-and-go-seek, or sardines in the box, with all the house thrown open to the game. But there wasn't a sound, only wind in the trees, which blew the wires and made the lights go off and on again, as if the house had winked into the darkness. As my taxi groaned away, I saw Gatsby walking toward me across his lawn. "Your place looks like the World's Fair," I said. "Does it?" He turned his eyes toward it absently. "I've been glancing into some of the rooms. Let's go to Coney Island, old sport, in my car." "It's too late." "Well, suppose we take a plunge in the swimming pool. I haven't made use of it all summer." "I've got to go to bed." "All right." So we've got Gatsby doing anything he can to hang out with Nick.
Yeah, like trying to have a
Yeah, he can't come out and be like, "Hey, can we talk?"
Yeah.
He's like, "Let's go and do all these things so I can maybe happen upon a conversation with you." Also note that he has not used his swimming pool, even though he has a swimming pool. Also, he has a swimming pool next to a river. Solid. Or the ocean?
The beach, I think it's, what is it called?
So he's probably on a bay, right?
A sound is what it's called.
That's right. What's a sound?
It's like a body of water, like a bay.
Okay. All right. Like Puget Sound.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. He waited, looking at me with suppressed eagerness. "I talked with Miss Baker," I said after a moment. "I'm going to call up Daisy tomorrow and invite her over here to tea." "Oh, that's all right," he said carelessly. "I don't want to put you to any trouble."
Like that's what he's there for.
Yep, exactly, right? "What day would suit you?" "What day would suit you?" he corrected me quickly. "I don't want to put you to any trouble, you see." "How about the day after tomorrow?" He considered for a moment. Then, with reluctance, "I want to get the grass cut," he said. We both looked at the grass. There was a sharp line where my ragged lawn ended and the darker, well-kept expanse of his began. I suspected that he meant my grass. "There's another little thing," he said uncertainly, and hesitated. "Would you rather put it off for a few days?" I asked. "Oh, it isn't about that. At least," he fumbled with a series of beginnings. Why, look here, old sport. You don't make much money, do you?" "Not very much." This seemed to reassure him, and he continued more confidently. "I thought you didn't." So, Gatsby is a great example of how not to talk to people. Like clearly this is why he throws parties. He can't talk to anyone. Mm-hmm. "I thought you didn't. If you'll pardon my... you see, I carry on a little business on the side. Sort of sideline, you understand. And I thought if you don't make very much, you're selling bonds, aren't you, old sport?" "Trying to." "Well, this would interest you. It wouldn't take up much of your time, and you might pick up a nice bit of money. It happens to be a rather confidential sort of thing." I realize now that under different circumstances, that conversation might have been one of the crises of my life. But because the offer was obviously and tactlessly for a service to be rendered, I had no choice except to cut him off there. "I've got my hands full," I said. "I'm much obliged, but I couldn't take on any more work." "You wouldn't have to do any business with Wolfshame." Evidently, he thought I was shying away from the connection, mentioned at lunch, but I assured him he was wrong. He waited a moment longer, hoping I'd begin a conversation, but I was too absorbed to be responsive, so he went unwillingly home. So note that Gatsby can only talk to people in like a transactional way, right? Mm-hmm. He does not have a way to connect with people in any sort of regular human emotion kind of way.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's like the whole thing of everything that's going on. Like something for something. You know,
Mhm.
nothing's free.
Mhm.
He doesn't realize like there's no true friends in this story,
Mhm.
right? So I think that's what he's not used to that.
Very
Like,
much.
you're
so.
doing this for me, so I can do this for you.
Exactly. Yes. He's not at all used to having a real friend. Only transactional. America is just transactions. Side note: this is also related to COVID-19, right? Because right now the current conversation is, well, should we just let people die so the economy can be okay? Can we just have like a transaction there where we trade in the old people and the vulnerable people and the people with suppressed immune systems, and we get back money
Yeah.
instead of having like regular relationships? The evening had made me lightheaded and happy. I think I walked into a deep sleep as I entered my front door. So I didn't know whether or not Gatsby went to Coney Island or for how many hours. He glanced into rooms while his house blazed gaudily on. I called up Daisy from the office next morning and invited her to come to tea. Don't bring Tom, I warned her. What? Don't bring Tom. Who's Tom? She asked innocently. The day agreed upon. Side note, if you didn't catch that, that's kind of like the thing where it's like your friend says something to you in confidence and then says, but I didn't tell you. And then you say, tell me what? And then they're like, exactly. That's what Daisy did. The day agreed upon was pouring rain. Usually, students, this is an ominous harbinger of things to come. Because if it had been a sunny day, it would have been like, oh, good things are about to happen. The day agreed upon was pouring rain. At 11 o'clock, a man in a raincoat dragging a lawnmower tapped at my front door and said that Mr. Gatsby had sent him over to cut my grass. This reminded me that I had forgotten to tell my Finn to come back, so I drove into West Egg Village to search for her among soggy, whitewashed alleys and to buy some cups and lemons and flowers. What? What's his Finn? Cleaning person?
I don't know, but it's capitalized, so it's probably like a name.
Yeah. This reminded me that I forgot to tell my Finn to come back, so I drove into West Egg Village to search for her. Must be like a servant or butler. All right, look it up. Tell us when you find it.
All right.
The flowers were unnecessary, for at 2 o'clock, a greenhouse arrived from Gatsby's with innumerable receptacles to contain it. An hour later, the front door opened nervously, and Gatsby in a white flannel suit, silver shirt, and gold-collared tie hurried in. He was pale, and there were dark signs of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. So, if we think about it, what did Gatsby have to offer Daisy when they were younger and he was trying to marry her? Nothing, right? He only had his personality.
Mm-hmm.
And then what did Tom do when he showed up to town? He showed up with like a carnival of things.
Yeah.
And so now Gatsby's like, I see how love works. I have to put on a show for her everywhere I go.
Mm-hmm.
What is it, by the way? Finn?
Well, I just got there. Finn is one of Daisy's household servants. He helps Nick set up his house for the visit between Daisy and Gatsby. I don't know why he says my Finn.
That's weird. I mean, he's kind of in the middle of these two classes, so he's like speaking as if he owns her because he has more than her.
Maybe because it's from free ebooks.
Oh, maybe it's a typo?
Yeah.
Possible. Is everything all right? He asked immediately. The grass looks fine, if that's what you mean. What grass? He inquired blankly. Oh, the grass in the yard. He looked out the window at it, but judging from his expression, I don't believe he saw a thing. Looks very good, he remarked vaguely. One of the papers said they thought the rain would stop about 4. I think it was the Journal. Have you got everything you need in the shape of tea? I took him into the pantry, where he looked a little reproachful at the Finn. Together we scrutinized the 12 lemon cakes from the delicatessen shop. Will they do? I asked. Of course, that's fine. And he added, howlily, old sport. So Gatsby's like terrified.
Yeah. So this part is like, he's just talking about, he's like, I want to get the grass. Like he hesitated, he looked around, I want to get the grass done. And now he's like, how's the grass? He's like, what grass? What are you talking about? Because now he's moved on. He's preoccupied with something else. Like, is this part going to be as good as I want it to be?
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, I already took care of that.
And it doesn't even matter to him.
Yeah.
The rain cooled about 3:30 to a damp mist, through which occasional thin drops swam like dew. Gatsby looked with vacant eyes through a copy of Clay's Economics, starting at the finished tread that shook the kitchen floor and peering toward the bleared windows from time to time, as if a series of invisible but alarming happenings were taking place outside. And so, what book does he pick up? Economics, right? And he's like walking back and forth. So, like, if she happens to walk through the door, it's like, oh, is that Gatsby? What's he doing? He's reading an economics book. Oh, he's so smart. he's so studious. Finally, he got up and informed me in an uncertain voice that he was going home. Why is that? Nobody's coming to tea. It's too late. He looked at his watch, as if there was some pressing demand on his time elsewhere. I can't wait all day. Don't be silly. It's just 2 minutes to 4. He sat down, miserably, as if I had pushed him, and simultaneously there was the sound of a motor turning into my lane. We both jumped up, and a little harrowed myself, I went out into the yard. Under the dripping's bare lilac trees, a large open car was coming up the drive. It stopped. Daisy's face, tipped sideways beneath the 3-cornered lavender hat, looked out at me with a bright, ecstatic smile. Is this absolutely where you live, my dearest one? The exhilarating ripple of her voice was a wild tonic in the rain. I had to follow the sound of it for a moment, up and down, with my ear alone before any word came through. A damp streak of hair lay like a dash of blue paint across her cheek, and her hand was wet with glistening drops as I took it to help her from the car. Are you in love with me? She said low in my ear. Or why did I have to come alone? That's the secret of Castle Rackrent. Tell your chauffeur to go far away and spend an hour. Come back in an hour, Freddie. Then, in a grave murmur, his name is Ferdy. Ferdi? What?
Ferdy.
Ferdy. Does the gasoline affect his nose? I don't think so, she said innocently. Why? We went in. What? Wait, what was that all about? So is she purposefully saying the wrong name? Because she's a name I can't say in a classroom, and this is a classroom? Like, is she just a terrible person?
I don't know.
Neither do I. Interesting.
Maybe he's about to say why. No.
All
Maybe
right.
his nose is messed up.
We went in. To my overwhelming surprise, the living room was deserted. Well, that's funny, I exclaimed. What's funny? She turned her head as there was a light, dignified knocking at the front door. I went out and opened it. Gatsby, pale as death, with his hands plunged like weights in his coat pocket, was standing in a puddle of water, glaring tragically into my eyes. With his hands still in his coat pockets, he stalked by me into the hall, turned sharply, as if he were on a wire, and disappeared into the living room. It wasn't a bit funny. Aware of the loud beating of my own heart, I pulled the door to against the increasing rain. For half a minute, there wasn't a sound. Then, from the living room, I heard a sort of choking murmur, and part of a laugh, followed by Daisy's voice on a clear, artificial note. I certainly am awfully glad to see you again. A pause. It endured horribly. I had nothing to do in the hall, so I went into the room. Gatsby, his hands still in his pockets, was reclining against the mantelpiece, in a strained counterfeit of perfect ease, even of boredom. He was trying to play it cool all the time,
yeah.
all the time. Like, oh, you're here? Oh.
Just in the corner, bobbing his head.
Yeah, just like, oh, hey, what's up? Also remember that he left the house so that he arrived after her because,
It's funny, I watched the movie yesterday, and when he comes to the door, he's like soaking wet, and he's like a mess.
He looks terrible.
Yeah.
He looks like someone just died.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the movie, highly recommend it. It's a good adaptation. Just don't get confused about what happens in the movie and what happens in the book. His head leaned back so far that it rested against the face of a defunct mantelpiece clock, and from his position, his distraught eyes stared down at Daisy, who was sitting frightened but graceful on the edge of a stiff chair. We've met before, muttered Gatsby. His eyes glanced momentarily at me, and his lips parted with an abortive attempt at a laugh. So remember, again, when he was younger and they met the first time, he was like, this is love, I got it. You just talk to somebody. And then to him, he was proven wrong. He's like, now I have to figure out how you actually woo somebody.
I think he's so nervous, too.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, we met before, like, he's quiet, he's not talking loud, and he's trying to laugh awkwardly, like...
Also, like, the worst thing you could ever say to somebody who you, like, wanted to marry years ago, and you're just saying again, like, we've met before.
Yeah.
Luckily, the clock took this moment to tilt dangerously at the pressure of his head, whereupon he turned and caught it with trembling fingers and set it back in place. Then he sat down rigidly, his elbow on the arm of the sofa and his chin in his hand. I'm sorry about the clock, he said. My own face had now assumed a deep tropical burn. I couldn't muster up a single commonplace out of the thorough sand in my head, or out of the thousand in my head. It's an old clock, I told them idiotically. I think we all believed for a moment that it had smashed in pieces on the floor. We haven't met for years, said Daisy, her voice as a matter of fact as it could ever be. 5 years next November, said Gatsby like a creeper.
Yeah, exactly. He's still in the corner acting all cool. Yeah, it's been 5 years in November.
13 hours and 14 days. The automatic quality of Gatsby's answer set us all back at least another minute. I had them both on their feet with the desperate suggestion that they help me make tea in the kitchen when the demonic Finn brought it in on a tray. What's wrong with the servant person? I don't get it.
He's Finnish, I think.
I got that part.
Why do they call him Finn?
All right. Amid the welcome confusion of cups and cakes, a certain physical decency established itself. Gatsby got himself into a shadow, and while Daisy and I looked conscientiously from one to the other of us with tense, unhappy eyes. However, as calmness wasn't an end in itself, I made an excuse at the first possible moment and got to my feet. Where are you going? Demanded Gatsby in immediate alarm. I'll be back. I've got to speak to you about something before you go. He followed me wildly into the kitchen, closed the door, and whispered, "Oh, God," in a miserable way. What's the matter? This is a terrible mistake, he said, shaking his head from side to side. A terrible, terrible mistake. You're just embarrassed, that's all. And luckily, I added, Daisy's embarrassed too. She's embarrassed? He repeated incredulously. Just as much as you are. Don't talk so loud. You're acting like a little boy, I broke out impatiently. Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy's sitting in there all alone. He raised his hand to stop my words, looked at me with unforgettable reproach, and opening the door, cautiously went back into the other room. I walked out the back way, just as Gatsby had when he made his nervous circuit of the house half an hour before and ran for a huge black-knotted tree whose massed leaves made a fabric against the rain. Once more, it was pouring, and my irregular lawn, well shaded by Gatsby's gardener, abounded in small, muddy swamps and prehistoric marshes. There was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gatsby's enormous house, and I stared at it like Kant at his church steeple for half an hour. Kant, the philosopher, I imagine. A brewer had built it early in the period craze, a decade before, and there was a story that he'd agreed to pay 5 years' taxes on all the neighboring cottages if the owners would have their roofs thatched with straw. Perhaps the refusal took the heart out of his plan to found a family. He went into an immediate decline. His children sold his house with the black wreath still on the door. Americans, while occasionally willing to be serfs, have always been obstinate about being peasantry. Interesting that the difference between serfs and peasantry, right, would be that serfs have a an obligation to work for like a lord, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas a peasant is simply poor. There's no obligation, right? So he's like, Americans are fine working for someone if they're poor, but they're not okay just being poor.
Yeah.
After half an hour, the sun shone again, and the grocer's automobile rounded Gatsby's drive with the raw material for his servant's dinner. I felt sure he wouldn't eat a spoonful. A maid began opening the upper windows of his house, appeared momentarily in each, and, leaning from a large central bay, spat meditatively into the garden. It was time I went back. While the rain continued, it had seemed like the murmur of their voices, rising and swelling a little now and with gusts of emotion. So it must be now and then. But in the new silence, I felt that silence had fallen within the house, too. I went in, after making every possible noise in the kitchen, short of pushing over the stove. But I don't believe they heard a sound. They were sitting at either end of the couch, looking at each other, as if some question had been asked or was in the air, and every vestige of embarrassment was gone. Daisy's face was smeared with tears, and when I came in, she jumped up and began wiping at it with her handkerchief before the mirror. Notice that Daisy's like, oh, he can't see who I really am.
Yeah.
He can't see my true form. I have to hide all of this. But there was a change in Gatsby that was simply confounding. He literally glowed. Without a word or a gesture of exaltation, a new well-being radiated from him and filled the little room. "Oh, hello, old sport," he said, as if he hadn't seen me for years. I thought for a moment he was going to shake hands. "It's stopped raining," Nick with nothing to say. "I'll talk about the weather." "Has it?" When he realized what I was talking about, that there were twinkle bells of sunshine in the room, he smiled like a weatherman, like an ecstatic patron of recurrent light, and repeated the news to Daisy. "What do you think of that? It stopped raining." "I'm glad, Jay." Her throat, full of aching, grieving beauty, told only of her unexpected joy. "I want you and Daisy to come over to my house," he said. "I'd like to show her around." "You're sure you want me to come?" "Absolutely, old sport." Daisy went upstairs to wash her face. At least Nick is aware, and he does not want to be a third wheel if he can avoid it.
He's a good wingman.
He is a good wingman. Daisy went upstairs to wash her face. Too late, I thought, with humiliation of my towels. While Gatsby and I waited on the lawn. "My house looks well, doesn't it?" he demanded. "See how the whole front of it catches the light?" I agreed that it was splendid. Yes, his eyes went over it, every arched door and square tower. "It took me just 3 years to earn the money that bought it." "I thought you inherited your money." I did, old sport," he said automatically, "but I lost most of it in the big panic, the panic of the war." I think he hardly knew what he was saying, for when I asked him what business he was in, he answered, "That's my affair," before he realized that it wasn't the appropriate reply. "Oh, I've been in several things," he corrected himself. "I was in the drug business." By drug, he means like pharmaceuticals, not like heroin. Well, probably heroin back then, but not illegal drugs is what I'm trying to say. I was in the drug business, and then I was in the oil business, but I'm not in either one now. He looked at me with more attention. "Do you mean you've been thinking over what I proposed the other night?" Before I could answer, Daisy came out of the house, and 2 rows of brass buttons on her dress gleamed in the sunlight. "That huge place there?" she cried, pointing. "Do you like it?" "I love it, but I don't see how you live there all alone." "I keep it always full of interesting people, night and day. People who do interesting things. Celebrated people." And remember, we were all at this party, and we read everyone who's at the party, and you could definitely say there is no one interesting at the party. Even Nick's not really that interesting. Instead of taking the shortcut along the Sound, we went down the road and entered by the big postern. With enchanting murmurs, Daisy admired this aspect or that of the feudal silhouette against the sky, admired the gardens, the sparkling odor of joquils, something French, probably of a perfume, and the frothy odor of hawthorn and plum blossoms, and the pale gold odor of, it's probably a flower, and the pale gold odor of kiss me at the gate, another flower. Side note, flowers have weird names. Was it a flower?
It is, yeah, just a flower.
Yeah. It was strange to reach the marble steps and find no stir of bright dresses in and out the door. I hear no sound but bird voices in the trees. And inside, as we wandered through Marie Antoinette music rooms and restoration salons, I felt that there were guests concealed behind every couch and table, under orders to be breathlessly silent until we had passed through. As Gatsby closed the door of the Merton College Library, I could have sworn I heard the owl-eyed man break into ghostly laughter. So it's like the house is haunted with guests of past parties.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
So in the beginning, right, we talk about the romanticism with Nick and everything like that, and like that's basically like what this is like. Who knows the story of their house? Like, of course, he wanted to know who built his house and who owned his house and how all that happened because he just romanticizes everything, right? And I think right now this is where we go into the part where he describes like how every single thing in the house was picked for Daisy, and he wants to know if she likes it and all that. So I think that like this is like that's like the theme of this chapter. Can you say that?
Yeah. So like the theme of the chapter is like pulling the veil away, like pulling the romanticism away. Is that what you're talking about?
Sort of, yeah. Or maybe like the shift of that, because now it's like Gatsby built this whole everything for Daisy,
right?
And now he's not like reaching out to a light anymore. It's like Daisy's here now, you know. So it's not the dream anymore, I guess. Yeah. So like.
No, yeah. So different than what I said. So yeah. So this is. He's built it all, and now she's here. So yeah, he's no longer longing necessarily. But I think he is still longing, right? Because there's still.
Yeah, she's not fully there.
Yeah, but he's not. The light's closer.
Right. Like, and I think that's why he says when he says old sport, like he hadn't seen me in a few years.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it had only been a few minutes, but for him, he waited 5 years to spend 5 minutes with her. So for him, it was forever.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe he was there.
Yeah, literally,
Time
it's
was
like a different
standing
day.
still.
It's like everything that's happened in the last 5 years was like one day, and now today is a different day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's like dreams accomplished almost is like what's going on. Where were we? Upstairs? We went upstairs through the period rooms? No, the period bedrooms swathed in rose and lavender silk and vivid with new colors. Through dressing rooms and pool rooms and bathrooms with sunken baths. Intruding into one chamber where a disheveled man in pajamas was doing liver exercises on the floor. It was Mr. Clip Springer, the boarder. I had seen him wandering hungrily about the beach that morning. Finally, we came to Gatsby's own apartment. So they just walked through his room that's not his room because he's just like living there.
This guy that's just always at the house.
That's funny.
So weird.
Finally, we came to Gatsby's own apartment, a bedroom and a bath and an Adams study where we sat down and drank a glass of some chartreuse he took from a cupboard in the wall. Side note, you live in a mansion if you don't live in a room, you live in an apartment in the mansion.
Yeah.
He hadn't once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revealed everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. Sometimes, too, he stared around at his possessions in a dazed way, as though in her actual and astounding presence, none of it was any longer real. Once he nearly toppled down a flight of stairs. He's like in this like dream-like state.
Mm-hmm.
His bedroom was the simplest room of all, except where the dresser was garnished with a toilet set of pure dull gold. So of all the things that you make out of gold, you make the thing that collects your poop and your pee.
Out of gold.
Out of gold.
Solid gold.
Yeah. It's like yes, all of this is stupid. Like,
Decadence?
His choices are so what's the term? Shallow?
Right. And I think that's because it's for Daisy. This is not his stuff. This is Daisy's stuff.
That's true. But
that's why it doesn't exist to him when she's around.
Very much. So he's not bought it for himself. He's bought it for Daisy.
For Daisy to come see.
I like that. Except his room is simple, which is interesting.
Right, because it's not all that other stuff is not his stuff.
Right. This is real stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't care about any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the real Gatsby.
Mm-hmm.
Who has a gold toilet.
Okay. Maybe she might see it.
Daisy took the brush with delight and smoothed her hair. Why does he have a brush? I guess he has long hair. Or is that just DiCaprio?
I don't know. I don't think it ever describes his hair. It probably will later.
Yeah.
In the apartment later. Or
the other apartment. Mm-hmm. Daisy took the brush with delight and smoothed her hair, whereupon Gatsby sat down and shaded his eyes and began to laugh. It's the funniest thing, old sport, he said hilariously. I can't. When I try to... He had passed visibly through 2 states and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment and his unreasoning joy, he was consumed with wonder at her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwound clock. So again, it's like someone spends all this time thinking and dreaming of something, but then when it actually happens, they can't like enjoy it for the moment that it is. Mm-hmm. Recovering himself in a minute, he opened for us 2 hulking patent cabinets, which held his masked suits and dressing gowns and ties, and his shirts piled like bricks in stacks a dozen high. I've got a man in England who buys me clothes. He sends over a selection of things at the beginning of each season, spring and fall. Gatsby doesn't even buy his own stuff, right? He's so separated from reality. He took out a pile of shirts and began throwing them one by one before us. Shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in many-colored disarray. So again, Gatsby doesn't know how to interact with people. And so what does he do? He literally is throwing his clothes in front of them to be like, look at my things.
Look at this.
Look at how impressive I am.
So Daisy doesn't have to go through all the drawers to know this, right? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Because remember, he's competing against Tom and all the other rich people who beat him early in life. In his head. While we admired, he brought more, and the soft, rich heap mounted higher. Shirts with stripes and scrawls and plaids in coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange with monograms of Indian blue. So it's all like pastels, kind of. Suddenly, with a strained sound, Daisy bent her head into the shirts and began to cry, stormingly. There's such beautiful shirts, she sobbed.
She's crying for the shirts.
Her voice muffled in thick folds. It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts. If you're confused, she's not crying because of the shirts. After the house, we were to see the grounds and the swimming pool and the hydroplane and the midsummer flowers. Side note, remember, Tom is a philanderer. He cheats on Daisy all the time. He's hit her at least once. Daisy hates her life, and now she's confronted with the person that she wanted to be with long ago. Because remember, at the beginning of the book, it talks about, or last chapter, right? Talks about how Daisy was trying to run away from home to go meet up with Gatsby, and then she couldn't. So now she's finally there, and she's probably crying because she can't have this. She's married. She has a kid. She's quite married, and this is not a divorced time in history. Unless someone kills Tom. After the house, we were to see the grounds and the swimming pool and the hydroplane and the midsummer flowers. But outside Gatsby's window, it began to rain again. So we stood in a row, looking at the corrugated surface of the Sound. If it wasn't for the mist, you could see your home across the bay, said Gatsby, like a creeper. You always have a green light that burns all night at the end of your dock. Daisy put her arm through his abruptly, but he seemed absorbed in what he had just said. Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. So kind of what you were talking about earlier, right? Mm-hmm. He's no longer reaching for the light. Compared to the great distance that had separated him from Daisy, it had seemed very near to her, almost touching her. It had seemed as close as a star to the moon. Now it was again a green light on a dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by one. It's a very interesting line. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by one. I began to walk about the room, examining various indefinite objects in the half-darkness. Because remember, Nick's third-wheeling it right now. They're like all having a close moment. He's like, how can I not be awkward? I'll just go back into the room and start looking at things. A large photograph of an elderly man in yachting costume attracted me, hung on the wall over his desk. Who's this? That's Mr. Dan Cody, old sport. The name sounded faintly familiar. He's dead now. He used to be my best friend years ago. There was a small picture of Gatsby, also in yachting costume, on the bureau. Gatsby with his head thrown back defiantly, taken, apparently, when he was about 18. I adore it, exclaimed Daisy. The pompadour. You never told me you had a pompadour or a yacht. Look at this, Gatsby said quickly. Here's a lot of clippings about you. They stood side by side, examining it. Creeper Gatsby.
Yeah, look at all these things I say.
Oh, Gatsby. Remember, he doesn't know how to talk to people. He's kept a scrapbook. Remember, so students, newspapers were these things that you got that were made of paper that had news stories in them, and people used to clip out stories with scissors and then put them in books, like Instagram but on paper, and then show them to people, I guess.
Like on people's birthdays, you would cut out the newspaper clippings instead of having your Facebook photo up.
Exactly.
Or your Instagram memories on your story, right?
Exactly. They stood side by side examining it. I was going to ask to see the rubies when the phone rang and Gatsby took up the receiver. Yes? Well, I can't talk right now. I can't talk now, old sport. I said a small town. He must know what a small town is. Well, he's no use to us if Detroit is his idea of a small town. Here, he rang off. Come here, quick, cried Daisy at the window. Do you think that phone call was planned so he could sound like he was in the middle of doing business all the time and Detroit was too small? Or is that real?
I think that was real and he didn't want to take the call.
Solid.
So he's like trying to be quiet. That's why he's kind of...
he's like, I can't talk right now.
He said a small town, you know? But at least that's what he's doing in the movie.
Come here quick, said Daisy at the window. The rain was still falling, but the darkness had parted in the west, and there was a pink and golden billow of foamy clouds above the sea. Pause. All right. We'll need to wrap up this short reading soon, unfortunately.
Okay.
Mm.
Oh, we're almost done with the chapter.
Are we?
Yeah. It's 103 is when it is. Yeah.
All right, sweet. Come here quick. The rain was still falling, but the darkness had parted in the west, and there was a pink and golden billow of foamy clouds above the sea. Look at that, she whispered, and then after a moment, I'd like to just get one of those pink clouds and put you in it and push you around. I tried to go then, but they wouldn't hear of it. Perhaps my presence made them feel more satisfactorily alone. I know what we'll do, said Gatsby. We'll have Klipspringer play the piano. He went out of the room, calling, Ewing, and returned in a few minutes, accompanied by an embarrassed, slightly worn young man with shell-rimmed glasses and scanty blonde hair. He was now decidedly clothed in a sports shirt, open at the neck, sneakers and duck trousers of a nebulous hue. Did we interrupt your exercises? Inquired Daisy politely. I was asleep, cried Klipspringer in a spasm of embarrassment. That is, I'd been asleep, then I got up. Klipspringer plays the piano, said Gatsby, cutting him off. Don't you, Ewing, old sport? I don't play well. I hardly play at all. I'm all out of practice. We'll go downstairs, interrupted Gatsby. He flipped a switch. The gray windows disappeared as the house glowed full of light. In the music room, Gatsby turned on a solitary lamp beside the piano. He lit Daisy's cigarette from a trembling match and sat down with her on a couch far across the room, where there was no light, save what the gleaming floor bounced in from the hall. So that's the second time that he sits down in like a shadow somewhere in the room to like hide. When Klipspringer had played the Love Nest, he turned around on the bench and searched unhappily for Gatsby in the gloom. I'm all out of practice, you see. I told you I couldn't play. I'm all out of practice. Don't talk so much, old sport, commanded Gatsby. Play. In the morning, in the evening, ain't we got fun? Outside the wind was loud, and there was a faint flow of thunder along the sound. All the lights were going on in West Egg now. The electric trains, men carrying, were plunging home through the rain from New York. It was the hour of a profound human change, and excitement was generating on the air. One thing's sure and nothing sure. The rich get richer, and the poor get children. In the meantime, in between time. These lines are not on accident, right? Saying that this is America. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer, which has been what's happening over the past 40 years, basically, give or take, is that the top 10% of income earners have become even more wealthy than they were before. It's called the Peter law in the Bible? I have to look it up. It's a biblical line. I'm trying to remember. As I went over to say goodbye, I saw that the expression of bewilderment had come back into Gatsby's face, as though a faint doubt had occurred to him as to the quality of his present happiness. Almost 5 years. There must have been moments, even that afternoon, when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams, not through her own fault, but because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. It had gone beyond her, beyond everything. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. As I watched him, he adjusted himself a little, visibly. His hand took hold of hers, and as she said something low in his ear, he turned toward her with a rush of emotion. I think that voice held him most with its fluctuating, feverish warmth, because it couldn't be overdreamed. That voice was a deathless song. They had forgotten me, but Daisy glanced up and held out her hand. Gatsby didn't know me now at all. I looked once more at them, and they looked back at me, remotely possessed by intense life. Then I went out of the room and down the marble steps into the rain, leaving them there together. And so we finally have two characters who are like deaf and blind to the flashy world around them, and are finally like engaged with one another. Right? We've got two characters who finally have like a genuine connection and relationship with each other.
Yeah, it was. When you were reading, I was kind of going back because it got to me like it all happened so fast. Where it was like was awkward, and then all of a sudden at the end they come together again, where he's like, okay, now you can go. Because it was weird that she was like, I wish I could put you up in one of those clouds and push you around in it, and then that's when Nick was like, oh, okay, we're good, I'm going to leave. But then they didn't want him to leave, and Gatsby got weird again.
Yep.
You know, and then he went into the darkness because exactly what he said, it didn't live up to the dreams and all of that.
Yep.
Because he expected more. For 5 years in his mind, he built up that as soon as she sees me again, I'm going to whisk her away, and this is it, and we're in love. And then that wasn't happening. So he's like, you got to stay because we're just hanging out. That's what he wanted. And then he kind of took himself out of the situation because he wanted her to come to him again, I guess. That's why he's going into the dark. The first time, I think, is he's nervous. The second time is like, what's going on here? Let's see if she comes back to me. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that this is kind of Fitzgerald pointing out the difficulty of putting so much power in dreams, because once you get there, it's either going to not live up to your expectation, or the victorious moment is going to pass, and then you're going to have to continue living.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of what happened with Gatsby, which was the moment happened, and then it didn't live up to his expectations. And it wasn't until in the last like 2 paragraphs when he started actually living, because he's finally in the moment talking to her, and she's in the moment talking to him. Because even her comment about the cloud is kind of like it's kind of like I'm trying to connect with you, but I don't know what to say, so I'm gonna say some weird like metaphor.
It's just like a surface thing. Yeah, there's no. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool.
But yeah.
All right, guys. Peace out.